Long ago, when the earth was a younger, gentler place, but humanity was on the brink of one of the great wars of the last of the giants. And these stone giants were mighty, living in their mountainous homes and their great halls, towering beasts of people with their own culture and wonderment. But as humans do all across the land, they just become plentiful. And so our story takes place just outside this wonderful city. The city was gilded with marble in the streets, and it was a modern enough city. They had sewage and plumbing, and as with all things, they also had a population of homeless people with no homes. They for different reasons. And here's where we meet this woman in her late 30s, and her name is Misa, I think. And Misa, she became homeless because her family, they were all conscripted. And in this particular society, men and women fought alongside each other. But they were conscripted into battle. And the sad thing is that when Misa was just young, she was she was orphaned. Her whole family was killed in one of the first early skirmishes between the stone giants and the people of this great city. And she was outcast because the city didn't care well for their people. There wasn't anything really wrong with her, but her education got stilted a little bit, and her knowledge was a little bit rough, and she just couldn't find work. She couldn't find work. It was very much a time of military, and she had a dream. She had this dream that she wanted to make changes within society. And she had, her talent wasn't a talent that a lot of people felt was a good talent, but she was incredibly empathic. She had the ability to feel to feel things when people barely said anything. And as a result, it was kind of crushing in many times in her life. And that's also what kind of led to her being homeless. Even though she was homeless, Misa had this propensity to never starve. She wasn't dirty, and she did find generosity from some strangers, but only in the form of trade. And her only trade was, she was sort of like a fortune teller, but more with empathy. She, in this world of magic and special delights, often would talk to people, not as a beggar, but just a person. And as she spoke to them, people who were really angry or really unhappy or really happy, unhappy, happy, yeah. Whatever they were feeling in the extremes, they always felt like their extremes pulled them back to the center. Everyone that ever spoke to Misa always felt like they were reset into a calm state. The world looked like it was possible to be more than what it currently was, this place of skirmish and war. And one of the things that Misa had built for herself, as she built, it's sort of like a mood ring and I guess it's like a mood ring that she built, and then when she conscripted to have these things made so she could give them to people, because again, the generosity of being able to work with different people. The design of the ring was that just like you'd think with the mood ring, it kind of carried a piece of her essence, and it helped rein in those really tough highs and lows, those peaks of emotion. And so she made a deal with a blacksmith, and she wanted to make more of these rings, and as a result, she became close to the blacksmith. And so the blacksmith, with his apprentice, his son, they got to work on making these rings. And her idea is that if she could give these rings to the people in power, the nobility, that these rings would help soothe the tensions between her people, and the stone giants, and then maybe they could actually stop being at war. And so while the blacksmith was working on forging these rings, there was an accident. There was a brutal and rough accident. Misa was there watching in the workshop, and as the rings were being molded and forged, they essentially had what looked like a liquid explosion, and as the rings themselves, they exploded upwards, and they're just basic pieces. And then she looked at this explosion, mid-explosion, and part of her essence, as she screamed because she was going to get covered with this, actually froze the explosion, mid-explosion. And as she screamed at it, parts of her actually transfused into the explosion, and it reversed the explosion and created these rings. There were only 3 of them, and she felt incredibly drained and almost broken. Everyone was very shaken by the whole thing. So one of the things about Misa that was really interesting is that she was a compulsive hugger. She hugged everyone all the time, and for some reason, because of the way people felt, no one was ever attracted to her. No one was ever scared of her. No one was ever awkward. Everyone felt incredibly loved and just calm. But that also meant she felt very alone, and she went to extremes to hug people. And so it may have turned out that her plot was afoot now. So she had, in order to get these rings to the essentially the equivalent of the king of the city and his ruling court members, she made it a point to attend a feast. So they had turns out that in the kingdom they had this they had basically a really successful skirmish where they pushed the stone giants off, and they found some imbued magical weapons. Story for another time. That these stone giant warriors left, and so they drug them back into the city. These things had to be carried by multiple people, and the intent was that they were trying to figure out how to break them down into their components. So with the feast that night, Misa, she went to the feasting hall with the court jesters, almost like the ultra combo jester, and she was able to attend as sort of the help. And she knew if she could just get close enough, that the way that she interacted with people, that she would be able to then give these rings through both the gift of hugging, and because like everyone would let her hug them. It was really strange, but it's just the way it was. It was like her special talent. And so her plan was very simple: show up with the help, approach as if she was part of the serving staff, the king of the manor of the city, and to present both in an awkward, strange way because it wasn't custom, but to present both the meal and a quick word, and to see if she could compel with her hug. So yeah, that was her plan. So she was going to she figured that she could give the king this ring. And so the last card. So what happened is that she went to the court, to the feast where everyone was being merry, and she spied the king at the head of the table when everyone was sitting down to feast. And right as the king was about to stand up and give a toast, came over to the head of the table, and the king was looking around and being very kingly as they do their things. And the feast was amazingly decked out with giant boar and wild crazy bits. And the thing is what you don't know is that the people were a little savage. They actually drug stone giant bodies back, and they would actually eat stone giant steaks. It was, I don't know what the deal was, but it was very insane. But they were also noble, and they were strange and kind of complicated people. And so the king is there, and he is about to give his speech. And Misa walks up to the corner of the table, and she puts down the tray, and she looks at the king, and she says in a very low voice, she says, "If I have maybe just a moment of your attention, I've brought this wonderful tray to you, and it's a special, delicious treat." And that got the attention of the king. Normally, he never pays attention to the servants, but as he saw her and speaking in her low voice, it compelled him to look at her. And once she made eye contact with him, she reached out gingerly and placed her hand on the king's hand. And she said, "May I offer you a hug for being such an amazing ruler over the world?" And normally kings don't do this type of thing, but he said, "Sure, this will be fantastic." And so he's standing there as he stood up to give his speech, and she puts her arms around him, and puts those arms around her, and they hug, and he feels what all these people feel, and that all of his stress and worry and his anger and his bitterness for having his kingdom invaded by these stone giants and his people killed, that washes away just a little bit. And then she pulls away from the embrace, and they look at each other, and she says, as she pulls out this ring, she says, May I present you with an heirloom that I have crafted. It is an essence of myself." And the king says, "Well, sure, I will take this." And so it turns out that everyone goes their way at that point. And as Misa is leaving, she realized a very strange thing. And that when the king decided to put the ring on his finger, as she's looking over her shoulder, and he was standing at the head of the table, she looked back, and the entire court was essentially they were undead. They were zombies and skeletal and rotted beings. And she has been suffering for a long time under this delusion. And the crazy thing that happened is that the king, when he slipped this ring on his finger, he transformed from essentially this undead king back to a flesh and blood king human. And one of the things that happened is that over time, as it turned out, the world had been crushed even more so by the stone giants. And really the world that she was living in was the aftermath of an insane campaign. And she did have connections with people, but being homeless, as she had this reflection, and there are 2 other rings that she had to still give out, but she realized that she was in a frame of reference, of place, almost out of time. She wasn't an apparition herself, but she realized she was speaking more and more with people that were on the cusp of being deceased, and that often her conversations allowed them to transition, and she couldn't really tell the difference, only once in a while in these glimpses. And that's the story of Misa, at least the first part of it.